America's college campuses were designed to be havens for free expression, and for good reason. Free speech is a requirement for free thought, and free thought is central to the idea of university. There's no other reason to have it. But it's at universities where those ideas, those freedoms, are now under the gravest threat. A new report by the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, finds that 90% of American college campuses have some kind of speech code that restricts what their students are allowed to say, and by extension, and this is intentional, what's acceptable for them to think. When they can control what you say, they control what you think. Robert Shibley is FIRE's executive director, and he joins us tonight. Robert, thanks very much for coming on. So when you say there are speech codes, is that strictly speaking? I mean, are these rules that say you're not allowed to express certain ideas or say certain things, or are they informal?
Yes, these are literally formal rules telling you what you can and cannot say on college campuses. And you're right, about 90% of them have codes that, if it's a public university, are unconstitutional, or if it is a private university, violates their own promises of free speech. So FIRE only rates those codes that are written down. If a college is engaging in informal censorship, that's not even part of these ratings.
So I think, except for a small handful of colleges, every college in America receives federal funding, every one. So they would all be subject to the conventional protections, civil rights protection, voting rights. Why are they not required to uphold the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech?
Well, it's interesting. There are some civil rights protections. Title IX is probably the most well-known one, but yes, some racial discrimination as well. Those do come. Those are requirements when you get federal funding. But actually, following the First Amendment is not one of those requirements. We don't make that requirement of colleges who take federal funds. But you're right; it's virtually all of them.
So why wouldn't it be pretty simple for Congress to pass a law saying if you're going to take tax dollars, you have to follow the Bill of Rights? That doesn't seem like a very tough ask.
Well, that is something that Congress could do, and it wasn't done back in the civil rights era. I think now you would see a lot of resistance on political bases, because I think people are, there's a lot of support out there, particularly among college administrators and folks who work at colleges, for these kind of restrictions. So I think you'd see a lot of opposition to that. I don't think you'd see a lot among your average Americans, though.
Man, well, if we ever get a Republican Congress, maybe they'll do it and build a wall and stuff like that, protect Americans. Here's hoping. Robert, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Jason Nichols is right in the middle of this debate. He's an actual professor. He teaches African-American studies at the University of Maryland and a frequent guest on this show. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
So it seems like kind of would be a baseline for a university to have pretty much absolute freedom of speech, a prerequisite for freedom of thought. Like, what's the point of having colleges if you can't say whatever you think?
Well, I think, number one, in society, we don't have complete freedom of speech.
True.
Of course, there's libel, there's defamation, there is, threats of violence and inciting violence.
Yes.
Those are limits on free speech. So I think we have this idea that freedom of speech means that you can say anything at any time.
No, we know what it is, because Brandenburg versus Ohio in 1967, the famous Supreme Court case, very specifically outlined the boundaries of free speech. And so libel is not allowed, of course. Imminent threats of violence are not allowed, but everything else is allowed. Everything else is allowed. And you would but it's not allowed at Apple or Amazon or some big authoritarian company. But colleges exist to be an oasis in the middle of our commercial society for free thinking. So why would they be the places where free thinking is punished most aggressively?
No, I agree that, there are many cases, and you and I actually discussed, a case a little while ago where there was a college professor who said something he shouldn't have said, and then all of a sudden people are talking about, oh, he needs to be fired, this is why we actually have tenure.
Right.
It is, to protect people so that they can say what it is that they want. But there have been all these attacks. There are these people who are trying to put limits on what it is you say. And I think that that's, problematic. But, I think overall colleges do protect freedom of speech.
So what would happen if you went into your class and said, yeah, I kind of like that Donald Trump. And what do I like about him? I like the family separation policy. I like the wall. He's right that Mexico doesn't send us its best. Just kind of read portions of a Trump speech.
Sure.
How would that work out for you?
I think students would disagree, and they'd have every right to disagree.
Of course they would. I would never contest that right.
As a matter of fact, even if they protested me, that's part of their First Amendment right.
You're not getting no debate from me on that. I believe in the free exchange of ideas, and despite the efforts to shut us down and shut us up, we're still doing it. But if you said that in a faculty meeting, no one would engage you. People would just say, you know what, I know you're African American, but you're obviously some kind of freaky bigot. You know what I mean? They would treat you like they treated Kanye West. Like, no one would engage you and say, let's talk through those ideas. You really think the family separation policy is a good idea? No. They would shout at you, wouldn't they?
Well, I think people would disagree, and I think they would have every right to disagree.
Yeah, of course. No, but I'm saying,
I think that
like, the whole idea of the college is you say one thing, I say another, and then we talk about them to get to wisdom. Isn't that the goal?
Sure, but I
they
think
wouldn't do that.
The conversation doesn't always have to be comfortable.
Of
that
course
means
not.
We can yell at each other. We can sit there and try to shut one another down. That's part of free speech.
Of course. I guess the macro question is, have you ever met a group of people with smaller minds than those who teach at America's colleges, less open to new ideas, to challenging, like truly challenging concepts?
I think that's what we literally do on college campuses.
Really?
Is challenge concepts and challenge popular ideas. I think, number one,
How about this? One of you go next faculty meeting and say, just for the record, abortion's murder.
Well, let me hold on, Tucker.
I just want to see how that works.
Let me tell you something. Every semester, we have abortion activists who come out and litter the campus with pictures of aborted fetuses.
Yeah.
And there are pregnant women who are walking across campus crying and all these kinds of things. It's still their First Amendment right.
Of course it is. I'm just saying, I'm just wondering if your
colleagues...
colleagues...
no one complains.
But what... Oh, people complain.
People complain.
But what would your colleagues say if you said that?
I'm sure they'd be disgusted and they'd be upset with me.
Oh,
some would.
They wouldn't be open to, like, why is he saying that? What are the ideas behind that?
But they don't have to be open.
No, of course, because but they should be, because they're not supposed to be small-minded. They're supposed to be broad-minded.
No, these are people who have probably studied the issue and they have
no, they haven't.
a particular
dumb people.
view.
Come on.
Oh, they're dumb people. People who study for a living are dumb people.
Yeah. Well, amazingly, that's the irony wrapped in the riddle. You are none of those things, which is why we're so grateful that you come on the show. Thank you, Professor.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Good to see
Appreciate
you.
it.
Time now for final exam. Can you do better than the news professionals at remembering